So last week we just gave an introduction to marine ecology. Um, I hope you have some understanding what are we going to learn in this marine ecology. So as I discussed there, this subject marine ecology going to be a very important topic, not only for you as the undergraduates, but especially for the country. There are not many marine ecologists in Sri Lanka. Only very few, very handful of people have actually engaged in marine ecology. So there are a lot of prospectus in the future for you to work as marine ecologists, uh, because with our vast marine environment, with diverse marine ecosystems, and with a lot of human interactions with the marine environment, which is we expected more interactions in the future. So we will have a lot of issues in the future as well. And we today also we have a lot of issues, but we will have more and more issues in the future. So it's very important that some of you worked on this field. Um, but of course, becoming a marine ecologist is not going to be something easy, as I discussed last week. You need a lot of uh, background knowledge, not only the knowledge, but you need a lot of other skills to be a marine ecologist, like swimming and snorkeling, and particularly diving. Right? I hope some of you have already have some such experience. Maybe not in diving, but if you have that skill, then you really can be a marine ecologist, which is going to be very good for you as well as for the country. So what we discussed last week is like what are the different zones in the marine environment. Of course, the aquatic science students already know these things, but just to bring the zoology students also into a common ground, I gave some like physically you can subdivide the marine environment as the pelagic or the water column, as well as benthic environment. Benthic environment again we can divide as like a littoral, sublittoral, bathyal, basal, heddle. They all depend on the depth, right? Basically based on uh, the the depth, right? Also the pelagic environment also we divide into different categories or the areas, right? All these are just arbitrary classification. There's no any reason why we do this. I mean, there's no particular reason except the depth, right? So the other more scientific classification or the categorization is like based on the light penetration, which we talk about the photic or the light, the top layer photic zone or the light area, and the bottom dark or the aphotic area, and in between there's a twilight or dysphotic zone. So I don't want to go back. So these are the basic areas that you can subdivide, right? We also discuss these things, and other than that, how we can uh, name different areas in the marine environment in general form, that also we discuss. And the next thing we discuss is about the coastal geomorphology. Actually, these are not really ecology, but if you are to understand ecology, of course, you need to have understanding about the marine environment. What are the marine physical features in the marine environment? Then only you can recognize different ecological provinces or ecological areas as well, right? So uh, I think this is where I stopped last week. We talked about the coastal geomorphology or the landforms. There are different landforms in the coastal environment, where some of these landforms are erosional features. they are formed just because of the erosion. The other features are actually depositional, right? Mainly the soil, sand, or erosion, and or the rocks, soil, sand, or rocks, whatever the in the coastal habitat. Any erosion will form this kind of a habitats, whereas on the other hand, some deposition of sand, soil, mud, silt, or even sometimes rocky rocks, and that will ended up in a depositional landforms. Most of these are actually the deposition by sand. Actually, I mean, we get more sand in the coastal environment, and most of these features are actually because of the sand deposition. Right? It's not only the sand, as I mentioned. It's maybe the silt or mud, right? Even the small boulders like rocks. Right. So these are the features. Just to give some idea, I put a few images here which I had last week, just to show you, especially the zoology based students, to give some idea about the coastal environment, right? So basically, I think you have heard about this thing like a bay, a lagoon, right, and a beach. You all know these kind of things, but the other terms like this kind of any uh, projections from the marine, like from the land, any projection to the sea, likewise, it's here, right, and here too. These are called headlands. Right? Headlands. Any projections that land go into the sea. If the any small or large portion of the land is, if it is going into the sea, towards the sea, and then this kind of a thing we call the headland, right? So I think you might have been to Rumasala, the jungle beach area. The Rumasala is actually headland, where you can see it has gone to the right into the middle of the sea, right? And anywhere, if you get a lighthouse, you see always a lighthouse is uh, structured in this kind of a headland where everybody can see, right? So that is a headland, right? Over the time in these headlands, you will see this kind of any erosional features, something like this, right? We call the sea arches, right? This kind of sea arch where it's open from the other side, and you will have sea caves like this, right? Some erosional features. Other than that, this kind of a platforms, wave cut platforms, right? It's not very common in a lot of areas in Sri Lanka. Usually, you see in the like if there is uh, a soil or rocky this kind of a um, ending, or the back of your beach is like this kind of a hill type, you will notice this kind of a wave cut platforms. It's very prominent some areas. I can show you. Here you can see such wave cut platform. I think even in Sri Lanka we have some areas. I can show you later on some photographs, real photographs from Sri Lanka, right? So one thing I have to let you know here, like um, unfortunately, it's so hard to get some real examples from Sri Lanka. Although we have most of these features, but it's finding this kind of information is not something easy. So sometimes we have to rely on the some of the images that we have to get from the others. Even in the videos, sometimes unfortunately we have to get from outside. Although we have all these kind of ecosystem, but we don't have scientifically made videos or photographs to show you, right? That is so unfortunate. Um, that's something that we can work on future. Even you can do, like we can make some videos from real example from Sri Lanka, not from the other country. Like this kind of a headland, the sea arches. Then we have the once if this kind of sea arch over the time, it may still decay or erode, and if you get it eroded fully, and you will end up like this. It's called right this kind of sea stack, right? This kind of sea stack, and when even a sea stack, when it's eroded, and it will ended up like a small part like this, then we call it a stump, right? Just like a cricket stump, the same stumps, something like a stump, then a stack, right? They are all part of the um, perhaps in a headland, previously a headland, right? Um, okay, even in the here you can see the similar situation. A stump here you can see the stump, then the sea stack, and you have a sea arch here, and then a cave, and you might even have this kind of a natural bridge, right? In Miris area, you will see this kind of actually similar situation. Later, I can show you some images, right? So that is basically what you see, right? All these are mostly they are actually erosional features, whereas the others are the depositional features. They are the mainly the sand deposition, right? Most of these features are just because of the sand deposition, right? As you can see here in a bay, this is a bay mouth bar, the sandbar in a bay mouth, right? And any a sand deposit like this, if it's if it has a open ended, right, in the sea, if it's like just blindly ended in the sea, then we call it a spit, S-P-I-T, spit, right? It's an spit, right? And you will have this kind of different formations, like this kind of a bay mouth bars, like covering a bay. Sometimes you can, even in a lagoon in particularly, you will see in Sri Lanka, usually you won't get many sandbars like this in the bays, but it's common in the lagoons. The lagoons can be covered in sand time to time, and they open during the rainy seasons, and it's closed in the non-rainy season. Right. The other depositional feature is actually this kind of a thing. It's called Tombolo. Right. Tombolo is a small island. Right. And this island could have been even like connected to the mainland previously, and it's been eroded now. Once it's been eroded, and then a small path is here, and this path is, it can be inundated, or this will be underwater during the high tide, but in sometimes in the low tide or in some seasons, this will fully open, and it will be like a deposit, sand will be deposited here, and you can even cross from here to here, right? So in this kind of a connection, land to the island connection, we call the tombolo, right? Even in Sri Lanka, there are many areas get this kind of a tombolo. I can show you later some real example for this, right? So, but I don't think you have heard, except the aquatic students, this term tombolo is not something very common. I mean, we don't really use this term, but like geologists, marine geologists in particular, they are very familiar with this kind of a coastal features, right? So I hope you are a bit familiar with this basic coastal geomorphology, right? And there's a video actually I just played last week. These few slides actually I just added uh, for you to get a better understanding about the marine and coastal environment, right? So if you look at the marine life form, right? If you compare the marine biodiversity with the land, right? The species already recorded in land versus marine species. You will see there are less and less species in the marine environment, right? Sometimes, I mean, we believe, or we sometimes think that the marine environment is more diverse than the terrestrial environment, but you can see the 86% of the species described uh, so far, actually they are land species, whereas only remaining 14% is actually the marine species, right? Even among among for this marine species, 98% are benthic, whereas only 2% are the pelagic, right? Just 2%. Right. So imagine now many cases we are getting fish through fisheries. Actually, we are usually targeting these pelagic species. It's not only those all species, but we have only 2% pelagic species. We've taken fish from that pelagic environment particularly. That's very small amount of when compared to the number of species that we have in the marine environment, right? So that's something to think of, right? There are not many species that we can actually harvest from the the pelagic marine environment, right? So that's something we have to think of, right? So if we move a little bit into the marine ecology further, right? We can we try to understand the different regions or the realms in the marine environment. What kind of ecosystems are there? But before that, what kind of organisms are? How we can categorize them? Right? There are different ways we can categorize them, and there, as you can see here, it's like very simply we can categorize all the marine inhabitants based on their lifestyle, right? Based on the lifestyle, we can divide them as like uh, plankton. Right? The plankton are the floating organisms, right? Where they can move, but they can't swim against the current, right? I think you have heard about the definition of plankton, right? They are the organisms who cannot swim against currents. But they can move up and down, perhaps. They have change. They can change or they can move, but they have no their own ability to swim against currents, and they are the plankton. Then we have the nekton. They are the one who can swim against currents. Right? They call the nectons. Right? As you can see here, all these are nectons, right? And these are phytoplankton, uh, right? And they all are nectons, right? The others are benthos, or the benthic organism, or the bottom dwellers. As you would see here, right? Benthic organism, or we call the benthos, right? Even the benthos, there are two types actually, right? We call epifauna and infauna, right? They are benthos, they are bottom dwellers, but even the bottom dwellers there are two types. The epifauna, right, are the one the benthic organism living in the top of the bottom, whereas the infauna they are usually burrowing into the bottom habitat, like they are usually found in the sediment, like many bivalves, many worms, right? Likewise, some species that we get in the among the sediment, right? So for example, bivalve. Right? There are some even the bivalves who have, edible bivalves. You can eat them, but to catch them, you see, you have to have some sort of a fishing gear where you can um, grab them from with the marine sediment, right? That's why you need some sort of a dredge to get these kind of organisms because they are just in the marine sediment, right? So in epifauna versus infauna, right? So that's the two type of organisms, right? So the plankton, necton, benthos, and there is another category which we often neglect. They are the decomposers, right? Like any food chain, it doesn't matter it's a terrestrial or the uh, marine or freshwater. In many cases, we forget about this group, that these are the decomposers. Um, they play a key role in any environment, but in many cases we forget about them because they are perhaps so small in many cases, right? But even the plankton are small, but we pay much attention on the plankton, but we don't really pay much attention to the decomposers, but they are also very important component in marine in particular, right? Not only in the marine, but also in the any habitat, as you know, right? Then the other term that, I mean, actually we are talking about the how we can categorize or group animal into, it's not only animals, even plant, sometimes any organisms into different groups based on their lifestyle, right? They're all based on their lifestyle. Um, and there is another term, sessile versus motile, right? So sessile organisms versus motile organisms. The sessiles are the one who usually are not freely moving. Now, in many cases, they are attached to the bottom, right? The attached to the substrate. Many cases, but sometimes they can move slowly, right? Like uh, many like corals, right? The sea anemones, they are sessile. They are attached to the bottom, right? Of course, they have the tentacles and they can move themselves, but they are attached to the bottom, so they are sessile organisms, right? Um, we use these terms actually for the animals, not really for the plant. I mean, almost all plants except phytoplankton, they are sessile. Um, so the motile are the one who can actually move, right? Any organism who can move uh, with their own, they will call the uh, motile species, right? So sessile versus motile. So these are the different groups that we can um, categorize based on the lifestyle, right? So the nectans, from that to benthos, right? So again, I've given some examples for benthos, right? From that benthos, you see some epifauna versus infauna, right? The epifauna here, even the crabs, right? They can be considered as a epifauna, even some bottom dwelling fish, like uh, even like a rays, madu, right? Usually they rest on the bottom, and of course sometimes they can come to the surface, but usually they found in the bottom. So in that case, we call them as the benthic epifauna, right? And whereas these tube worms, like here, right? So these tube worms, uh, right? So these tube worms, then right, uh, other clam worms like this, right? So they all, uh, right? They all in fauna. Actually, they are living within the marine sediment, right? Right. So that is epifauna versus infauna. Now, the next is the the species that living in the deep ocean, the the species living in the more deeper areas of the ocean, right? So they can be either nectans or benthic, but those who live in really in the deep ocean, right? Somewhere like in the bathyal zones to abyssal zone, particularly in the abyssal plain or in the very deep areas, right? So unique thing with that, them, these organisms is that they are totally living in darkness, right? Throughout their lifetime, they have to live under darkness. Uh, so we can further discuss on this later on, right? Okay, so so you can imagine what kind of adaptation they should have, right? So as you can see here, like the different organisms, different groups of animals living in different habitats, right? Why do they live in this? Some groups are living only here, whereas some are living here, some are here, and others are here, right? So this uh, their usual area in the sea where they live, right? They usually don't change. Like any organism living here, they never come to a place like here, right? And organisms living here, they will never get here. Or any organism living here, they won't come to the surface, right? So these are actually biological regions sometimes, some bioregions, which they don't really cross, right? Um, of course, these kind of lines are arbitrary, right? It's that we drawn for our easiness of explaining things, but the animals, they don't, right, follow these lines that we draw, but they have their own limitations because there are many the physical, chemical, and the other parameters that affect the organism, right? The any organisms living here, they are well adapted for a dark environment with very high pressure, with very low temperatures, right? In the deep in the ocean, there are very low temperatures and very high pressure, right? And they are adapted to the environment. They won't be able to come to the surface because uh, they live in this under high pressure, and if they come here, they will they might burst, right? They will break into pieces. Because of that, they won't be able to come to the surface. And then and that's what happened even like if you're a diver, if you come very quickly into the surface, right, your blood vessels and even your lungs can collapse suddenly because of the pressure change, right? On the same way, if any organism living here, they go down, they won't be able to withstand the very high pressure here, right? So and they will die, right? So likewise, there are many barriers in the marine realm where the organisms are limited to some areas in the marine environment, and we might think that this just open water, they will go everywhere in the sea, but it is not. Some are adapted to only for shallow waters, but whereas some others are adapted to the deep waters, and usually they do not cross these boundaries, that they can sense that, right? All right. This map show the distribution of benthic organisms. Um, the most of the benthic organisms usually get more benthic organisms in this dark colored areas. The dark blue means more, like here it says the benthic biomass greater than 300 are the dark areas, you see. So most of the benthic organisms are found in shallow areas close to the continents or the close to the, the coastal areas of the continental shelves, right? So um, that is another thing that you need to remember. Most of the benthic organisms usually they're in the shallow waters, but of course the same time you have to remember that there are some benthic organisms even in the deep down in the even in the Mariana Trench, like in the deepest areas, even we get some benthic organisms, right? But not usually. there are few, right? Now the other things are the why these organisms are distributed differently in different environment. Why do they have restricted some areas, right? As I mentioned before, there are many factors. Right? I have given a big list here, like the temperature, dissolved oxygen, food availability, right, and the light penetration, right, and then the nature of the bottom, and then salinity, waves, tides, currents, so many other physical parameters affecting the organism's existence. That's why we get different organisms in different areas of the marine environment. Uh, we need to learn a little bit more detail on these aspects, right? Why the organisms are restricted to some areas. As you can see here, you can subdivide into different bioregions, right? On the same time, uh, like the amount of dissolved oxygen, that how it changes the depths. This is an example, right? Usually you get this kind of thing in the tropical oceans. You see the red color, right? Red color shows the amount of dissolved oxygen in the marine environment with depth. In the surface, you get very high oxygen concentration and sharply decline with the depth up to around 1000 meters and gradually increase thereafter. Right, so this is the oxygen curve, right, and then this area we call the oxygen minimum layer or OML. Right, usually around 800 to 1000 meters area, there's very less oxygen. Right, so now we can imagine why we have some animals here with more oxygen, right, and you'll get some other organisms here with very high oxygen, right? To get that same oxygen like here, you have to go very deep into the ocean, right? So can anyone explain why this kind of why the oxygen is showing this kind of a relationship? Why it is very high in the top and sharply decline with the depth before starting the oxygen concentration increase once again after 1000 meters, right? Any one of you can give a reason why oxygen behave like this, right? Can you anyone think of why oxygen behave like this? Any answer? The aquatic students, go aquatic guy. I think I have already mentioned in your oceanography as well. Can anyone explain and think of why the oxygen behave like this? Right. Go cover the kata karana. Right. Yes.
Thermocline effects.
Right. Okay, Shashini. Thanks for your answer. Thermocline. Yeah. Yeah, that is one of the reasons. Thermocline is one of the reason, but in reality, the yes, temperature definitely is one factor, and thermocline have some influence, but the mainly the oxygen difference, the oxygen, if in order to dissolve the oxygen more, what you need, there is another answer, because light penetration up to that zone and the photosynthesis occurring, right? There is a in the chat. It's got have sent an answer that is due to the the more oxygen production in the upper shown. Yeah, that also true, right? All these are correct. I think Gayatri has sent me a message.
Mixing
Yeah,
due to the mixing of water column.
yes, that is actually yes. That, all these three answers actually correct. Because it produces more oxygen in, because of the photosynthesis in the top layers and the temperatures. And the last answer is a much better answer, because for the oxygen, the mixing is the most important parameter. That's why you use the aerator in your fish tank or in aquaculture ponds, right? So you use a pump, right? Hungak ay hitanne මේක මේ oxygen pump එකක් කියලා, right? තාමත් හිතන් ඉන්න ඇති අය aquatic කරන අයත් සමහරට හිතන් ගන්න මේ oxygen pump එක. They are not oxygen pump, right? It's just a pump just to mix water, right? The turbulence in the water, right? Any turbulence in the water that increase the oxygen solubility in the water, right? The turbulence is the factor of the mixing, right? We have a lot of mixing in the surface layers. That's why you have more oxygen here. And with depth, there is no good mixing, and that's why the oxygen is decreasing, right? Less mixing, less oxygen. But now again, the oxygen increase from here, right? For that, the influence is from the temperature actually. With temperature, the higher temperatures, the oxygen retention or the solubility is very less. Actually, so not really the solubility, but the retention. The partial oxygen partial pressure, the increase with the increase in temperature. Sorry, decrease, right? The retention is decrease with increase in temperature. That's why with decrease in temperatures here, and that increase the oxygen partial pressure here, and more retention in the oxygen because of the temperature here. And it's the mixing, right? So it's the influence from the temperature, the mixing, as well as the other factor, there's more production here in the top layers as well. But the main reason is the mixing and the temperature, right? So that's some explanation to that one. The other things like how these affect the marine organisms, how affect the amount of oxygen differently in the different organisms. That also we need to think of, later on we can discuss further. Oxygen minimas, we will something talk about the hypoxia. I think you have heard about this marine hypoxia, where low oxygen areas in the marine environment ended up in killing majority of organisms in some areas. It's called the marine hypoxia. These kind of things, right? And the other factors like water transparency, how it affect the marine organisms, right? And other than that, other form of adaptations that marine organisms have. There are so many adaptations in the marine environment to attract predators, for the safety of from the predators, right? For shading, counter shading, and different colors. Like, well, there are many adaptations. Not only that, to like they have to deal with the salt. The outside environment is salt, right? So because of there's less water in the outside, it naturally tend that the water content of the organisms to go out, because the water content outside salt is less than the internal body. So there's a tendency that water can go out of their body. Then they have to have adaptation for that, right? So for a fish or other organisms to live in the marine environment is really difficult. It's a harsh environment actually than a fresh water, right? marine environment is really harsher than the freshwater. So to find animals in the marine environment, they definitely need to have a lot of adaptations, right? Um, right, and the other big issue is the biggest issue in the marine environment actually that marine organisms face is the pressure, the water pressure. How to withstand the very high pressure, right? So every 10 meter you go down, right? Every 10 meter you go down, there is a 1 atm increase in the pressure, right? Like 1 atm at the uh, the beach, the that the whole the atmosphere, the pressure from the whole atmosphere is we call 1 atm, right? Up to several kilometers height, but from beach, if you go 1 meter down, you have the same pressure, right? For every 10 meter you go down, there's a 1 atm increase. Right? You can imagine if you go to right 1,000 meters, then there's a 100 atm pressure. Right? So how this very delicate animal can withstand this kind of very high pressure, right? So if you are I don't know anyone if you have done diving, or at least you have done some skin diving. If you have gone deep, right, even in the swimming pool, the university swimming pool, if you go to a 10 feet deep, the 10 feet depth, you will see the pressure, how much pressure you will get, right? How much uh, how much you will feel uncomfortable from that just 10 feet pressure, right? Every feet you go down, you get very uncomfortable because of the pressure. But how animal go and live in the bottom, right? Uh, Especially if you are diving, that pressure really impacting you. So there are many different ways you can avoid. I mean, you can't avoid to minimize the impact. Uh, right. So pressure going to be another huge issue that that animals going to encounter in the marine environment, right? So I'm actually still giving a sort of an introduction, so we can talk a little bit more in the later in coming lectures, right? Just want to give some background to the marine environment, and we will talk more in detail during our lecture series, right? Um, so before moving on to the today's the lecture, I have a few things to discuss with you.